As you know, this year's RDR is devoted to the urgent theme of investing in rural youth. Urgent because the 1 billion people between the age of 15 and 24 living in developing countries are all too often marginalized. And this is exceptionally, especially true in a rural area where lack of access to land, lack of access to market, input and capital is holding back some 500 million young women and men. The situation is especially serious in sub-Saharan Africa, where the rural youth population is expected to increase 70% by 2050. If mishandled, this youth bulge becomes a problem. At the same time, this is a tremendous opportunity, and we want to see it as an opportunity to harness the energy and the creativity of young people to achieve transformative change. Let us make no mistake. To turn a generation of youth otherwise destined for substantive farming or migration into tomorrow's farmers and agribusiness entrepreneurs requires that we invest in them. Investing in their future benefits obviously everyone. In the next 3 decades, we will need a new generation of farmers to grow the food to feed the extra 2 billion people, mostly in low-income countries. What this report makes clear is that we need not only more investment, but smarter investments. In practice, this means investing as well in rural infrastructure and development to create an environment in which young people can thrive, both economically and personally. Training young people in production and processing is a waste of money if there is no road to take them to markets or no markets at the end of the road. And where the infrastructure, the communication, and the institutions are in place, we must also bring down the barriers that too often block the ambitions of young people. Insecure land rights and lack of access to credit are very high on the list, but so are the lack of knowledge and skill, both cognitive and non-cognitive. When countries invest in their youth, they are investing in their own future. Such an investment pays off not only in terms of economic growth, but also in the form of greater social stability and equity, as well as lower crime and forced migration. The benefit of investing in youth extend well past national borders. We will need the creativity and energy of young people to tackle the global priorities, such as the climate change and the erosion of biodiversity, and to achieve the 2030 SDG agenda. I sincerely hope that you will find the time to read this report and collectively to take its recommendation to heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gilbert Hongbo, President of IFAD, for your inspirational remarks. I would now like to welcome Excellency Gabriel Mabairobe, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development of Cameroon. The Honorable Minister will deliver remarks on the importance of harnessing the power of a strong youth population for the future of Cameroon.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, President of IFAD, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, dear friends, distinguished guests. Cameroon is honoured to be part of this high-level panel to examine the 2019 report on rural development, which looks at issues related to young people. Cameroon acknowledges that production by the IFAD of these rural development reports is a praiseworthy initiative because these really are a very key instrument for analysing the challenges facing the rural world. And in fact, since this report first came out in 2016, the quality of the physical and indeed the content of the presentation of this report have improved progressively. We very much welcome the general orientation of the 2019 edition, which really focuses on young people, because this is something that's so important in today's world. As the report underlines, young people are 1.2 billion people in the developing countries' population, and they are facing specific challenges that are as they make their transition to adulthood. In view of this situation, we must develop planning tools on a world level in the context of SDGs to respond to the specific needs of young people. Moreover, the challenges for rural areas where the young population is growing very quickly are much more complex. So that we can feed the world, we are convinced that the world needs sustainable food systems. These must be produced in such a way that they are more productive and inclusive and based on better innovations and knowledge that is really much more up-to-date and much more advanced. And to this end, we need to better channel the potential of young people in terms of know-how and dynamism. I'd now like to mention the central role played by the FAO and IFAD in setting up this action plan for the UN Decade of Family Farming. And I'd like very much to congratulate them for that excellent initiative. And really, young people have a very important place within all of this. And of course, this report that we are seeing today for the first time highlights the role of young people in really bringing this decade to bear. Our duty, therefore, in the context is to reflect upon models of development that involve young people, that are inclusive from a gender perspective, and also rest upon the sustainable use of the resources of our planet. These development models will allow humanity to be creative, to invent opportunities which are viable and sustainable for young people, with decent employment and favourable environment perspectives, particularly in the rural areas. And this is within the framework that we can really see that no one will get left behind. Now, this report looks back on the perspectives for young people as far as improving productivity of young people, of women and of young girls, their connectivity and interdependence globally, their commitment in terms of technological innovation programs and startups which are ready to go and just require financing. Now, in this particular context, we're particularly happy to see that the funding opportunities are made available through South-South Triangular Cooperation, SSTC, which does provide an exceptional occasion or an exceptional opportunity for young people so that they can share and adapt innovations for developing, thanks to exchanges among young people, and of course the contribution of IFAD in collaboration with the other UN agencies in Rome is very much to be appreciated.
Director, Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen. In Cameroon, we have an important youth population in the rural areas, many of whom are engaged in smallholder family farms. The legitimate aspiration of those youth is to live a decent life in an environment such which offers good economic and social opportunities. Obviously, many of our villages do not offer thus the increased tendency of the youth population to migrate in already saturated urban areas. The main challenge is how to keep them in the rural area. In our strategy to support rural youth, we have developed a program financed by IFAD, and we are happy to announce that there's a young girl who have benefit for this finance, who is in this hall and will give a commitment. The PEA Jeune, which is the Youth Agro-Pastoral Entrepreneurship Promotion Program, targets youth, access to finance and education, improve the youth-sensitive legal framework and organization, and development of agricultural business activity, which are focused on area of the program. Ultimately, this program aims at creating business opportunities for rural youth. By 2021, we expect this program will have educated 25,000 young people, supported over 5,000 young-led businesses, created over 20,000 jobs, and promoted 12 incubation centers. Other programs such as the Planète Jeune or the National Civic Agency for Development are key government programs under implementation that target essentially the entire youth population. We look forward to continue to partner with IFAD to create opportunities for rural youth in Cameroon. In this regard, the upcoming visit of the IFAD board to Cameroon will especially provide a valuable opportunity to consolidate and enhance our collaboration. Let me conclude by expressing again my appreciation for the presentation of the report being launched, which represent important guidance in how we can involve and empower youth in the context of SDG implementation. For our part, Cameroon looks forward to working with IFAD and other partners to implement the recommendation of the report, which we see as an important part of achieving our shared vision of a world where no one is left behind. Thank you for your kind attention.
So thanks to His Excellency for his important remarks on Cameroon. Let me now welcome His Excellency Ottoman Hussein Faid Muji, Minister for Agriculture and Irrigation of the Republic of Yemen. The Honorable Minister will deliver remarks on supporting youth in building a bright future for Yemen. You have the floor, Minister.
Shukran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Mr. Hongbo, President of IFAD, Your Excellencies, the ministers, ambassadors, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to congratulate IFAD for this report that is very important and is focusing on creating opportunities for rural youth in order to achieve SDGs. The rural youth are the future for many countries. However, there are many young people who are trying to work in agriculture, and we need to support them seriously in order to face the challenges faced in agriculture. We need to engage them so that we ensure their livelihoods and we make agriculture an attractive sector for all of them. For Yemen, agriculture is playing a pivotal role in our economy. Agriculture is allowing us to achieve important gains. 30% of our local consumption is coming from agriculture. The labor force in agriculture is more than 60% of the active employed population in Yemen. Many smallholders are working, and there are more than 1.2 million people in Yemen. People of 30 years old are working in agriculture, and they constitute an important segment of our population. The number of youth working in rural areas increased because we are witnessing an urban rural migration against all odds in Yemen. And more than 35% of global corporations unfortunately closed their doors to us due to security and many other challenges due to the Houthis uprising. Many corporations stopped working with Yemen, and unfortunately, many people were licensed from their jobs. So basically, we believe that we have many youth people that unfortunately had to leave Yemen, and they are trying to look for other sectors. That said, we need to make sure that we can provide market access to those remaining in Yemen in order to achieve sustainable results when it comes to engaging youth in rural development. It is very important to deal with organizations that would support this effort, like IFAD. We need to make sure that all segments are engaged in this sector in order to ensure agricultural development. In light of the population growth, we need to ensure an economic growth. And it is very important to make sure that youth are on our priority agenda. In light of the protracted crisis in Yemen and the Houthi uprising, we believe that we are witnessing an aggravated situation. This hampered the cycle of agriculture and impacted negatively our market access and the consumption of our produce. The food insecurity rates in Yemen, unfortunately, is being borne by more than 1 million people. This should prompt us to work in order to bring the uprising and the Houthi coup to an end. We need to make sure that international organizations play their role in Yemen in order to find a solution to the current situation in Yemen. The fact that young people are not able to reach knowledge and education is impacting, unfortunately, productivity, and it is hampering also the entrepreneurship and projects in this sector. It is very important to provide extension services to those and to ensure training and agricultural education for them so that we can respond to the market needs. The fact that there is no environment attractive to young people will unfortunately impact this sector. However, it is very important to provide credit and inputs to young people. As such, they will be able to engage in this sector. This will ensure also financial incentives as well as micro projects for them. And we will be able also to attract investments from abroad so that we can help young people to own lands and face the current circumstances. The PPP, private-public partnership, is a very important point of our discussion. It is very important to focus on these partnerships in order to make youth participate in this effort. The war raging in Yemen by the Houthis affected negatively the investment in youth. On the contrary, young people were recruited by Houthis and by rebels, and they were mainly under 25 years of age. This unfortunately led to a deteriorated situation because these people couldn't find any decent job. It is very important to find strategies and conduct studies in order to absorb hundreds of thousands of young people so that they can start investing in agriculture instead of being mobilized by the Houthis or by armed groups. Ladies and gentlemen, providing opportunities for rural youth will help us achieve many goals and attain our priorities. This will ensure agricultural development and economic growth, and this will help us achieve SDG 8, which is providing decent job opportunities to all by 2030. This also will contribute to achieve SDG 1 and 2, ending poverty and hunger, respectively. In the end, I would like to mention that IFAD is playing a pivotal role, especially in supporting agriculture across the world. We look forward to continuing working with IFAD in Yemen so that we can ensure that young people will take part in the agricultural sector with the support of our partners in the development and the humanitarian nexus. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks and enriching messages. It's now time to move on to the next agenda item, where we will listen to Paul Winters, our Associate Vice President for Strategy and Knowledge Department at IFAD, and he will deliver a presentation on the most important findings of the RDR. But before we listen to Paul, we will see a video which has been produced especially for this event and for the RDR.
Young people 15 to 24, an age of possibility, a time to prepare for the future. Most of the world's 1.2 billion youth live in developing countries, 500 million in rural areas. But their numbers are growing fastest in some of the poorest places, and the obstacles they face are daunting. Poverty and inequality, lack of skills and training, limited access to land, finance, and technology.
Như tôi đã nói từ trước rồi là thế hệ trẻ chúng ta phải chủ động.
The challenge that we youths in this area face is financial aspect.
No a cualquier mujer, por lo general en los lugares rurales se nos toma en cuenta, pues siempre está más que todo el machismo que se genera, ¿verdad?
Thách thức lớn nhất của người trẻ hiện nay thì vẫn là làm sao để tạo ra thu nhập để nuôi sống gia đình, làm kinh tế.
What can be done to help these young people seize the opportunities of the digital revolution now spreading across the developing world and avert the impacts of climate change? How can governments and policymakers harness the potential of this growing population while meeting the aspirations and demands of young people themselves? The 2019 Rural Development Report, Creating Opportunities for Rural Youth, finds that these challenges, if met, will provide unparalleled opportunity at a critical juncture.
If we do not take any special initiatives, we'll have to continue facing those forced economic migrations and the risk of increased inequalities and the fragility that comes with all of that.
The report presents the constraints youth face in an increasingly complex world. The poorest nations in sub-Saharan Africa have the fastest growing youth population, but are least able to address the challenges. And among young people, women face some of the biggest obstacles.
Young rural women can be said to be facing a triple challenge. Basically by the nature of living in rural areas, being female and being young.
But there are opportunities.
Among young people, we found that 67% live in areas with great agricultural potential, but only in a third of those do they actually have market access.
Investments focused on 3 key areas may pay some of the biggest dividends for rural youth.
Productivity is referring to our ability to generate income. That's not good enough, though. We need to be connected, especially for young people. You have to have a sense of agency. You have to feel empowered. And it's the 3 of those together that allow young people to take advantage of opportunities.
Productive, connected, and in charge of their own futures.
Kwa hii focha nimenunua kondo, nimelipa school fees na nimeongeza shamba kwa 5.
Inshallah قاعدين زين جزاكم الله.
Ahora me veo como un empresario.
You have all these young people, they're capable, they're able to contribute, they can be productive. What can we do to actually ensure that they're included in the process of rural transformation? A broad, strong rural development policy combined with a clear policy of including young people is the best way to go to address the issues of young people.
Failing to invest in young people will be failing them, their families, and their communities. We'll also compromise our capacity to reach the very challenging development objectives we have set for ourselves.
Ahora somos jóvenes que aportamos más a la sociedad, aportamos más a nuestra familia y están mejor preparados para la vida.
So let us now give the floor to Paul Winters. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. So I'll take over and give the highlights from the report. The first thing that we should keep in mind is... It's okay. Do the translators hear me? No. How about now? Can you hear me? Translators say, oh, there we go. Usually people can always hear me from a distance since I speak so loud. So the first thing is to look at the data that we have. So there's 1.2 billion young people aged from 15 to 24. Of those, about 1 billion live in developing countries. Of those, 65% right now live in Asia and about 20% in sub-Saharan Africa. But as you can see from this chart, the growth is most in sub-Saharan Africa. To the point by 2050, 40% or nearly double the amount now of youth in the world will be in sub-Saharan Africa. So we have this very large increase. Now where is that increase going? It's raised the most in poorer countries. So those bubbles show you the size of the population of young people where poverty rates are high and where gross national income is lowest. And we see these large bubbles on this left-hand side. And we see that there's a lot of young people in those areas. And this shouldn't be too surprising. The fertility rates are highest where people are poorest. So in the poorest countries, we have more children being born. And because of that, we have more young people. The demographic transition hasn't occurred. And so we have this large increase of young people in some of the most challenging settings. Now, youth are central to all of this. They need to be connected, they need to be productive, and they need to have agency. So if you think about back when you were young, that transition period and the challenge, you're going from dependence to independence. You're making decisions that are going to affect the rest of your life. You face particular constraints in making those decisions. And that's influenced by a number of factors. First, the setting in which you reside, the country you live in, where you live within that country, the household you grow up in, is all going to affect that. It's also affected by the specific constraints you face. Do you have access to land, credit, etc.? And then it's also affected by the changes that are occurring. And right now, the dynamic nature of things, in terms of climate, in terms of technology, in terms of this youth bulge, are so quick compared to the past that it creates this additional challenge that we didn't have. So looking at the setting, the first setting to consider is, what is the overall economy like? How transformed is that economy? And so when we look at countries in terms of their structural transformation, how changed is the overall economy? How much has it shifted from agriculture to industry and services? And also, how changed is the rural economy on the bottom axis? How changed is it moved from agriculture to non-farm activities, to agro-industry? A number of countries have gone through that transition, but a number have not, meaning that the opportunities are generally less. If you're in a country where there's lots of transformation, there's agro-industry, there's a food system that's working, you have all of these opportunities. But what we find is that 3/4 of the youth population are actually in areas where there's not as much opportunities. The rural area is not transformed. The opportunities are limited for everyone, so it's hard for rural youth to participate. Then on top of that, where do they live within the countries? 2/3 of rural youth live in areas with agricultural potential. This is on the far right side. So here we have commercialization potential. Basically, do you have access to market? And then on the bottom, agricultural potential. What's the potential to produce agriculture based on geographic information system? And what we find is that 2/3 of them live in areas with agricultural potential. But if you look at the top right corner, only 1/4 of the overall population has access to markets. So that means that 2/3 have a hard time. They can produce, but they can't actually get it easily to markets. And it creates the opportunity to do something so that they can get access to those markets. The third area, they're in their households. How does that affect what they do? If you look at this far left side, this is a subsistence household, and young people that live within those households. Nearly 2/3 of them are going to go are on their own farm. The majority, the rest, are almost all working on someone else's farm. Nearly 100% here are still in agriculture. As you go further along to households that are further away from agriculture but in rural areas, you do see less of a dominance of the agricultural sector. If you're in a purely non-farm household, there's only a few percent that have their own farm. But a large percent are in the agri-food system, and a large percent are working off-farm in the agri-food system. So what we find at the end is that half of the income that go to young people is in agriculture. So we have this idea that the future of youth is not in agriculture. The future of youth is agriculture in rural areas. The majority are there. And the opportunities that you create in that sector are going to be very important. We often hear this number that farmers are getting old. That's the average age of farmers in Africa is 60. That isn't the case. That's because we're measuring the head of the household, and people are living longer. They're not transferring the land to the younger people. The average age that we're getting when we're looking at anyone who works on farm is 34 years old. The median age is even lower than that. So a large portion of young people are going to be in agriculture. So the question is what kind of agriculture are they going to be in? Now, youth face their own particular set of constraints, though. Even when they have those opportunities, they face their own challenges. The first is in capacities and skills. They need to have cognitive skills. They need to know how to manage books. They know how to manage businesses, all of those types of things. But one of the things we're finding more and more is the importance of non-cognitive skills. The World Bank put out a report last year on the changing nature of work. And a lot of that is about how technology is advancing so much that you have scale without mass. In the past, all coffee went through Mombasa from East Africa through big factories. Now, you can just sell it directly. And so I met a Rwandan farmer who's selling directly to China and to England. Scale without mass. To do that, you need to be able to network. You need to have leadership skills. You need to have these non-cognitive functions, and we need to make sure that that's being provided. Access to finance. We know that a lot of rural households face challenges in getting finance, and it's harder for young people. You have no background in getting finance previously, so you have no record. You have no land to use as collateral because you haven't gotten any yet, and so you face all of these constraints. Access to land. It's great. People are living to a longer period in life, but it also means they're not transferring their land as early as they did in the past to young people. So 1 out of every 3 adults in farming have a secure access over their land. 1 out of 10 young people have secure access. And for women, that's half that amount. And so we also have particular challenges for young women. We know there's studies that have shown that the agriculture production in countries like Malawi, Tanzania, for women is 30% less than it is for men on female plots versus male plots. Why is that the case? Because they don't have access to the kind of inputs, the kind of labor that men have. For young women, it's even harder. The challenges are even greater. So we have this whole set of constraints. And then we have this dynamic nature of change. You have all of these changes occurring at the same time. We have demographic change. So we know urbanization has gone from about 1/3 in 1990 to 50% now. So half the population is in urban areas. So there's a big change there. The rural population itself has doubled since the 1950s. So yes, people are moving to urban areas, but the actual sheer numbers of people in rural areas has doubled over the last 60 years, 70 years. But most importantly, the transition that's occurring is fast. All of the countries that a lot of us come from, like myself in the United States, went through a demographic transition. We had a period in which there was young people that were moving into the market. We used that to get what's called the demographic dividend. Suddenly you have all these young people coming into the market, and they can pay for the older family members, and they can pay for the younger family members. You have low dependency rates. This is happening now, and we need to take advantage of it in a lot of countries. The problem is it's happening at a speed and a volume of young people that's unprecedented to the past, which makes it particularly challenging. We have climate change that is causing all sorts of issues, and particularly in agriculture. There's an estimate by the World Bank that's saying climate change will increase the number of poor by $120 million, 120 million people from a baseline without climate change by 2050. If we don't do something about climate change, we're going to have all sorts of issues for the current generation, but particularly for the younger generation. And I'll show you some data on that. And then, of course, the digital revolution that was shown in the video. Just to show a couple points on this, if you look at the percent of the population that have a large population of youth and the percent from agriculture, what you see is the countries most dependent on agriculture also have the highest number of youth. So countries that have 20% or more of their GDP coming from agriculture have a 19% of their population are young. That's compared to 11% on average. So you have a lot of young people. Who's going to be most affected by climate change? Countries that are affected by, that are heavily dependent on agriculture. So climate change is a youth issue by virtue of the fact that you have a great deal of young people in these economies that are dependent on agriculture. In terms of digital technologies, one of the things we can see in this graph is that countries that are at lower levels of transformation, that have less developed rural sectors, end up using mobile money more because the other infrastructure isn't available. And it creates this great opportunity for young people in those areas, if they can be connected, to take advantage of those digital opportunities, because they have slightly more than adults, but the opportunity is greater in these areas. So what should we do? As noted, the rural youth need cognitive and non-cognitive skills. And I was going to give an example of the project in Cameroon, but the Minister of Agriculture from Cameroon has already provided that example, this Père Jounes, and we also have a young man from that program that'll be speaking on a panel in a minute. As the Minister noted, it's trying to get 5,000 youth businesses going, and the key difference is this incubator model. In the past, we used to just try to train farmers, or train young people, and everyone always talks about training young people. That tends to just give cognitive skills. It just gives them the basics for going forward. What we need is them to come across problems and to be able to solve those problems. And so we're pushing for and others as well, for an incubator model. The idea is that you have mentors that help those that are starting up businesses. So you don't just train them, you follow them. You accompany them through the process, and when problems come up, you look for additional help so they can ask questions. We also need to not just make them productive, but make them connected. So we also work to empower young people. As an example of that, in El Salvador, we've created this National Rural Youth Group that is working to make sure that youth voice is heard. There's 3,000 young people from 13 different departments, 60% of them women, who are working to make sure that their needs are met and increase their agency within that country. Then on top of that, we also want to address the primary constraint facing young women, that triple burden being young, female, and rural, and to try to address that. So the manner in which we're doing this is through this GALS program, to, I can never remember what GALS stands for. It's a program to sensitize both men and women. So instead of trying to empower women by focusing on women, you're trying to empower women by discussing with both men and women within the household how they can have shared prosperity, how they can work together. Last week there was an event here at FAO in which a researcher from the World Bank, from the Gender Innovation Lab, showed that this approach of working with men and women versus just women brings about greater production, income, all sorts of other things across the board compared to just working with women. So it has great potential. We've reached over 100,000 people with this, 40 programs in 28 countries. So what should we do? Now, the first thing is to make sure that any youth policy is embedded in a broader development strategy. One of the things you find is that since we want to address youth issues, we often will train, we'll provide digital technology, et cetera. If we do that in an area where there's no opportunity, it's not going to be helpful. I can provide market information to someone on their phone, to a young person on their phone. If there's no market for them to access, it's not going to do much. We need to start by making sure there's general opportunity in rural areas. And we need to build that opportunity. In doing so, we need to include young people in that. We need to make sure they participate. But focusing on specific youth constraints in that context is not going to be helpful until you address the overall constraints. So what you have to have is a right balance between these broader opportunities and the youth-specific constraints that young people face. And in doing this, you need to make sure that you're achieving the objectives of productivity, connectivity, and agency. So to see this visually, if you have a country that has less transformation, that there's lower opportunities, those areas within the country where opportunities are limited, there's no market access, even if there's agricultural potential, the balance of the policy should be on rural transformation that's youth inclusive. Remember the youth, but focus primarily on creating broader opportunities. When you are in those countries in which there are opportunities, where the market is there, when you're in the peri-urban, semi-urban areas where the market exists, then you really have to help the youth overcome those constraints. Make sure they have the skills, make sure they have the access to land, make sure they have access to finance, that the specific constraints to women are addressed, and focus on those. So this is the broad framework that we wanted to present. Before I finish, you saw them in the video, but I do want to just give a special thanks to Aslihan and Constanza, who are the co-internal leads, and Eva Maria sitting between them. So right back there are three young women who have done a great deal of the technical analysis. So thank you.
So thank you, Paul, for this enlightening presentation of the RDR. We will now open the floor for some questions, and then there will be ample time also after the panel debate to take more questions. So we have a question for Paul there. Yes.
Yeah, hi. My name's Ben Davis from FAO. I have one question with kind of 2 points to it. One is, when we're looking at the agricultural sector, I mean, it was couched in the sense of addressing the issue of rural migration. Clearly, it depends on the kind of agricultural development that you have in terms of the capacity to produce jobs that will provide an incentive for the rural youth to stay in rural areas. And so, I mean, as Paul described, if you can, if the older farmers can move into pensions and the younger ones can replace them, but what is the capacity to produce new jobs? And I mean, clearly there's going to be a process of rural migration that will continue, right? but it'd be good to know if kind of what is. Can we put numbers on the capacity of agriculture to address this demographic bulge? Is basically the question. Thanks.
We have another question here from our colleague Massimo from FAO.
So thank you so much. And first, let me send his regards from the Director General of FAO, who couldn't make it today because of the transition that we are in these days. So, Paul, I have two questions. One, youth is central. Yesterday here, there was a launch of the Council for Zero Hunger of the Youth, which I think is, again, showing the importance. But one of the things that we learned from the WDR of the World Bank was the little value that youth have at the beginning because of the lack of human capital development. So a lot of our GDP is undervalued because they will never reach 100% of the potential in rural areas that are even lower than 30 or 40%. So that puts a question on where we put our priorities. Should we put our priorities on human capital development, or should we put our priorities on generating jobs like it was mentioned before, so creating opportunities for youth, or how we move in parallel? So how we can create coordination across all the agencies so that we can get the complementarities that we need at this point. So how IFAD is seeing themselves as part of this puzzle of the world of MDBs and international organizations working on that. And the second point is this issue of the relationship, this nice graph that you have on the relationship between structural transformation and rural transformation. Is there a competition between both, or both should be moving at the same time, creating opportunities in both urban and rural, and how the role of digital technologies could play a role to satisfy the potential choice of migration or mobility, which should be a choice and should be something good for the youth also? Thank you.
Thanks for that. It's a good question, Ben, on the capacity to produce new jobs. That'd be something that would be very hard to quantify in the sense of knowing specifically what types of jobs might be most suitable in a certain area, given the underlying economic conditions or agricultural conditions. The expectation, though, would be that what we want to do is to make sure that there's opportunities for people to stay in rural areas, particularly young people. And that requires that jobs be generated both in agriculture and a number of the linked industries. And so the emphasis should be on making sure that, given the context, we are able to generate jobs in both areas, but it would be good to try to figure out, the relative weight of those. I just don't think we have that kind of evidence available to do that. For Maximo, I've read that report as well, and I think one of the issues, though, we shouldn't be too surprised that young people who have less experience doing things are going to have less value than people with lots of experience. I should hope so, being as old as I am, that I do have some value, but that value comes over time, and part of it's the experience that you get through working and doing certain types of activities. So while education clearly is important and you want to develop human capital, a lot of those non-cognitive skills that are going to be developed are through practice and doing things out in the world. And so starting people on the right path at the beginning is very important to develop those kind of skills. And I think that's one of the concerns right now, is that the previous generations didn't have the opportunities when they were younger, and so they end up on a certain path. And if we make that mistake again, we won't get people on a more virtuous path that allows them to work and develop as they go along, and not to stay in agriculture that doesn't require that higher level skill. In terms of the structure and rural transformation, I mean, ideally you would expect that they would go together. A lot of them are linked to the fact that the overall economy, rural transformation should accompany structural transformation. You expect the economy to change, agriculture to be less of a share. That doesn't mean it's not growing, but it becomes less of a share, urbanization to occur, and the structure of the economy to change. With that, you expect the rural economy to go with it. A lot of the problem, though, is a lot of countries have urban bias in their policies, and so the rural areas haven't gotten the kind of investment they need to transform. And there's opportunities there because of the urbanization, the transformation of diets, and so there are opportunities there. So what we hope is that they can kind of move together. And one of the things that graph on mobile access shows is, in countries, the opportunity for digital technology to leap some of the issues that we see is there. That's why it's so prevalent in the low transformed economies. They're able to use the digital technology more because they don't have other options. And so the hope is that some of this digital technology can be used to leapfrog and push forward this rural transformation in a faster manner.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's now time to start our panel session. So we'll listen to some distinguished speakers from across different regions. And I would like to welcome the moderator, Wendy Piat. Wendy is an advisor on education and government in the UK. And prior to her current assignment, she was CEO and Director General of the Russell Group until 2017, and also served as an advisor to the Secretary of State for Business and Skills from 2009 to 10. Wendy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Sorry, there's a pause because there's a transition. So my guests are coming up now, I believe, once we've swapped over the nameplates. Sorry, does my mic sound very loud? It may need turning down. Have we got enough? Olivier, here. Okay, well, I'm delighted to be here, and forgive me if I seem to start on a note of flattery, and I have no benefit from saying this, but I have to say I thought the report was excellent, and I have read most of it. It's very long, but I honestly thought the analysis was really robust, and there were some really astute and interesting insights in there. For example, I'd like to think I'm a pretty well-informed person, and I've worked in the British civil service for many years. But even I was surprised by the sheer numbers of young people living in rural areas. And I thought the report conveys the urgency of making sure we improve the life chances of young people in rural areas. As Paul was saying, we're also facing the sheer pace of change, which is unprecedented. And I really think, as the report indicates, there's a significant risk of a lost generation. And I don't want to be too melodramatic on behalf of the report, but I do think the report is right to say we need to act in a thoughtful and strategic way. And the other thing I liked about the report, actually, was it did bring out the complexities of intervention. That, if I've understood it correctly, you can't just throw millions of dollars at youth programs, however tempting that might be, if there isn't adequate structural reform in a country, and that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. But enough from my little humble reflections. I have a panel here of real experts, and we don't have a lot of time, so I really want to get their views on this matter. So first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our first guest, the Honourable Enda Weir, the Minister for Agriculture, Food, Fisheries and Water Resource Management in beautiful Barbados. Now, time does not allow me to do credit to all of his achievements. I'll just say he's dedicated at least, 30 years to improving the development and sustainability of travel and tourism in the Caribbean. And he's clearly a man with a mission, because I noticed in the press the other day, he said that he was determined to make sure agriculture is not seen as the Cinderella ministry, but the real key to economic recovery in Barbados. So first of all, I really want to ask a question, Excellency, what are the problems as you see them facing Barbados, the Caribbean at large, when it comes to youth opportunities? And what are the most effective strategies to deal with them? Just a short, little, easy question to kick off with. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Indeed, I'm flattered by your introduction. President Hung Bu, honorable ministers, delegates, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me first start by thanking IFAD for inviting me to participate in this session. And I do support the laying of this report. Many of the information revealed today in the report actually lines up well with the experiences of the people in the Caribbean. Youth development has been recognized as a developmental strategy for the Caribbean region. And this is reflected in various policies and action plans which have been formulated over the past 5 years. These policy plans include CARICOM, Common Agricultural Policy, as well as the regional and national food and nutrition security policies and action plans of CARICOM member states. The issue of youth unemployment continues to be one of the greatest developmental challenges in the region and also in my country, Barbados, and is recognized that due to the prevailing economic conditions which have impacted employment and job creation, that Barbadian young people will continue to encounter increasing difficulties in finding readily available jobs in decreasing markets. And so therefore, as the job market continues to diminish, the greater the challenges will be. It is upon that platform that the government of Barbados believes that many decent employment opportunities can be created in the agriculture sector. And given its ongoing programs for the expansion of modernization of the sector, it is the intention to stimulate a greater appreciation for farming and entrepreneurship in agriculture and agribusiness industries among the youth in Barbados, especially in light of the fact that the average age of the current farmer in Barbados is age 55. Given the negative perception of the youth towards any activities related to agriculture, it is considered therefore essential to first portray agriculture as a reputable career option and sensitize young persons to the potential opportunities available in agriculture. Therefore, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, which I head, has been undertaking a number of initiatives aimed at encouraging nation's youth to become more involved in agriculture production and agribusiness development. And I will highlight some of them so that you have a sense of understanding of where we're going. The Agripreneurship Incubator Program, which ended in 2018, was an intervention that resulted in the development of at least 15 agribusinesses and 60% of participants remaining in the agricultural sector on a full or part-time basis. And we have just launched only a month or two ago the Farmers Empowerment and Enfranchisement Drive. The acronym is FEED, and deliberately so. And this program is designed to empower and enfranchise young people, particularly women, in urban and rural districts, simply because we recognize that there's now significant opportunities available to our young people in terms of the economic structure and ownership of the economic pie in Barbados. And this spreads right across the use of technology, getting into hydroponics and aquaponics, apiculture, and of course, the development of animal husbandry using the Barbadian black belly sheep, which is highly indigenous to Barbados. It's a very unique species where we are going to go the full value chain in using the meat as specialty cuts for the tourism industry, whilst at the same time using the skin to develop some of the finest leather available in the world. And the geographical indicator is pretty much known to Barbados. The species, you can check it online, is an absolutely wonderful animal, but presents many economic opportunities for young people in agriculture. We've been able to benefit by the way of support and training through the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture, ICA, and they have been hosting several farm programs for young people in terms of training with the National Vocational Qualification, Caribbean Vocational Qualification. And this targets secondary schools and people who did not leave school with the requisite qualification, but still have an opportunity to participate by using agriculture as a means of owning their own business. There's no doubt that these programs collectively play a supporting role to the development of youth agriculture, and indeed several industries that can spin off. We therefore recognize that the challenges that confront us must be addressed, and these relate to moderate interest in participating in agricultural activity, limited access to land, limited access to capital financing, limited access to marketing. Many of the people who are young and engaging in agriculture enter without the requisite experience, even though they would have had some training. And so therefore you will find that they enter quickly as sole proprietors rather than incorporated business, and this presents an enormous challenge in terms of borrowing, in terms of even gaining the confidence of lending institutions. And therefore there's a greater need for institutions like IFAD to participate in the development of youth in agriculture by providing with the necessary funding for the development and sustainability of agriculture among youth. The youth in Barbados and in the Caribbean region are now transitioning to careers in agriculture given the changes in the economies, and several governments across the Caribbean region stand ready to embrace the concept of mitigating climate change, managing droughts, and creating solutions where agriculture now will become the primary economic driver in the region and indeed in my country.
Excellency, thank you so much. That was the perfect start to the panel discussion. And I will come back to you, as will the room, with questions. But I do want to introduce our second guest, another stellar contributor, Gauri Mipuri, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who's the co-founder of the award-winning The Learning Farm. The Learning Farm is an organic farm that provides livelihood training for vulnerable youth in Indonesia. But the Learning Farm is just one of her achievements. She's a serial social entrepreneur, I think we can call her. And by the way, if you should go on the internet, go on TED Talks, but the equivalent in India is Inc, apparently, and she's fantastic, giving inspiring speeches. It's a shame we don't have more time, because I was completely enwrapped in her presentation about the Learning Farm. But what I want to ask you first of all, Gauri, is how do we make farming more attractive to young people? Is there a problem there? And how do we solve it?
Hi, thanks so much for an amazing, is this okay? All right, okay, I'm on now. Thanks for glowing introduction. I'm afraid you might get on Inc and then be a little disappointed, but thank you so much for that, Wendy. And thank you for having me here at the panel. President Hongbo as well. It's good to see you. I told you I'll see you in Rome, and 1 week later I'm here. So yeah, just a quick introduction to the Learning Farm. It was set up, for those of you all who, it's a very small project compared to the numbers that you all deal with in this room. I set it up 13 years ago in Indonesia, an organic farm for street kids and for refugees. They come and they learn organic farming. They stay with us. It's residential between 3 months if they're in a pressure to start contributing back to their families, up to 1 year. The 1 year program is a little bit closer to an incubator rather than just teaching them agricultural skills. I think we've won the awards because of our curriculum, because we're talking about non-cognitive and cognitive. Well, basically 13 years ago, we set up a curriculum which covered all the soft skills where we've divided into heart, head, and hand. The hands is the agriculture. The head is using your head, because it's going to be a hard world out there, and getting all those skills that you need to be a success. And the heart is really the healing and the self-confidence and all those skills which these young people need to be successful. The ages between sort of 15 to 23, so that's youth, and very happy to say that because of a huge investment from Red Cross, we now take in women as well. We've been taking 50% women and 50% young men, because we didn't have the dorms before. Why is Red Cross investing in us? Because they see us building resilience for the future, but resilience also against extremism, because these kids come from 16,700 islands throughout Indonesia, and they live together, and they function together, and they learn tolerance for each other, and that's a very important part of our curriculum as well. So sorry, that's my farm. What makes it attractive? The first thing I want to say is, from all the vulnerable young people, whether urban or rural, they all actually want to go home. They want to go back to the land. They want to go back to their villages if they had a way to lead decent lives. And so whether it's the skills that we can give them to lead sustainable lives, and all the other things that have been discussed here, markets and loans and technology and all those things, but as the report points out, also the investment in the rural infrastructure, which will let them lead not the same, but a similar life to what their counterparts in the cities are leading. So they can go for a movie and have access to the internet. And if they get married, their wives can go to decent hospitals, and their children can have a decent education. So it's a combination of both things. So the first thing is they do want to go home. What'll make it attractive, to go back to your question, is I think it's doing the traditional alongside new innovations. It's not going to be business as usual for these young people. You can't teach them the same thing that their parents had possibly learned and hope that you have to have them future ready. So techniques and technologies, so I'm giving you examples really from the ground, because that's where I work. Their parents have not made greenhouses, for instance. Their parents have not learned about liquid fertilizer or black soldier fly maggots. They don't have access to drying and vacuuming packaging machines. It's the whole gamut of technologies that, if they went back to the farm, they have to go back with this superior knowledge. The other thing that they're really worried about, and when you talk about how do you make it attractive, they're really worried about climate change. Because mom and dad back home are saying, there's no water, why are you coming back here? So a lot of our curriculum is based on climate mitigation. We teach whatever rainwater harvesting, drip irrigation, mixed crops, whatever we can. In fact, we are getting somebody to come in and completely overhaul our curriculum for the next 1 year, so that we can really focus on this. We can solve the problems in the farm because we can have access to money. But when they go back to their 1.5 hectares of land, they don't have the money to put all these systems in place. And the third thing I feel, I've talked a little bit about the curriculum. To make it attractive, we've made the curriculum such that you're looking very much at the youth as an individual, teaching them respect, and really, really important, teaching them entrepreneurial skills as well. So we give them, job skills, help them make their CVs, life skills, and the rest of it. I think I'll stop here.
That's great for now. And I'm conscious that us slightly older people are talking about the problem and what young people need and how they struggle to make a success. So I'm so excited. We actually have someone who's done it here. Olivier Mapere, who's a real success. I'm in awe of what he's done. He set up a small farm when he was still a student. He used to have to walk, 15 kilometers to get there every day. And his farm has absolutely flourished, hasn't it? And you can tell me a bit more about that. Please do tell me a bit about the farm and the struggles that you had, but also what can we do to encourage more young people to have a voice, to really take part in these discussions and have an impact on policy making?
Merci.
Thank you. First of all,
I would like to thank the government of Cameroon, which gives a lot of opportunities to young people, both in the rural and the urban settings, to really be able to ensure their development. But allow me also to thank IFAD, because this is the second time that they have given me a platform to come and share my experiences. The IFAD was at the summit and in Yaoundé, where I shared my experiences with them. So my experience then, to really understand where we're coming from. Olivier Maporé was born to agricultural or farming parents, and agriculture was a constraint, first of all, but he turned that into a passion. And when it became a passion for him, he decided to go with that. And that's why my studies involved my training in business and in agriculture in my secondary education and further education. And I decided that that's what I was going to do for a job. And I set up a project, indeed, while I was still at the Faculty of Agronomy in 2008. And when I completed my studies, I went to a little village. I moved there, and I started with just 300 hens. But I was driven by a passion and a taste for risk, because that's what it's all about in the agro-pastoral field. You've got to take risks. So we started with 300 hens. I moved up to 500. And in 2016, I had reached the figure of 4,000. So that's how I managed to move forward, thanks to IFAD, and I extended this structure and built upon that. And that's why I went from 4,000 to 6,000, and today 10,000 in 2019. 10,000 animals. So if people say, are you satisfied with your project? I can say I certainly am, because my organization is a benchmark now, and I receive about 100 young people a year. They come to get inspiration from the model I've built, and indeed to learn how to set up their own farms. I would also say I'm satisfied because everybody wants to work in big air-conditioned offices in Cameroon, in public or government offices, but I really don't want to do that. And I want to encourage other people to live in the countryside and to build up their own business. And I think I can see things differently. I have an engineering background, and I think that there are about 15 young people I've got sort of in my dossier. And these are 15 young people who've decided not to go for the city life. They've decided to set up in the country. And I went to get a visa, and the lady who received me and said, are you planning to disappear in Rome, to go off in Rome and not to come back again? But when I come back to Yaoundé, I'm going to invite her to come to my farm, my holding, and she will see if I wanted to stay in Rome or whether I wanted to come home.
Alors,
so, I dare to believe that it's necessary, that it's important to invest in the rural population, because we are the future. And as far as policies are concerned, I think the Cameroon government has already done a lot to support our actions, but it's also very important for us to do more, to go further. So I'd already like to thank the new agriculture minister. He's a specialist in development and transformation questions. The government is going to do a great deal to help us to process our products. Production units are developing. When the product is ready, we need to open up markets. And so it's very important that we can process the product, develop markets, and really place our products on those markets. And Cameroon has already signed partnership agreements, but we need to ask ourselves, at what level is this going to benefit young rural entrepreneurs? And when we ask that question, we can see very quickly that the Cameroon government needs to help us to formalize our businesses, because once they're formally set up, then we can become competitive on the markets. But also that would allow us perhaps to certify our products too. And that way we can really compete with other companies and multinationals. We need to get the label, we need to get the certification. But what's most important for me is to be able to start vocational, specialized vocational training. Because for a long time in Cameroon, you just got a diploma for your training, but now we need real professional pathways. What I mean is, for example, a young person who wants to work with chicken products, we've seen that is a product that has a good prospects. But you need the minimum amount of information on rearing poultry, on nutrition, on health issues. And if we can provide financial support to a project as they develop, we need to permanently monitor and track this product so that we can build capacity building training around what they need. And I think that can become very competitive, and that will allow these young entrepreneurs to better thrive. Now, Cameroon has really opted for second generation farming, but that means we have to have real mechanization. And so, Mr. Minister, I would very much like you to be able to help us to develop the right infrastructures. If we've got a young person with a product they want to get to Yaoundé, it's not good enough just to have the product. If the road is so bad that he cannot get the product to market, that's the challenge. That's what we need. So I hope I haven't taken up too much time, but I really did want to share that information with you.
Thank you, Olivier. And I really want to, because time is limited, Emily, I want to introduce Emily Onga. She's a trained agronomist. She has extensive experience in education and rural advisory services for smallholder farmers in various systems in Kenya. Now, Emily, I really want to talk a bit more about technology and how, because it can be a double-edged sword, as the report brings out actually quite effectively. How do you think modern technology can help solve these problems?
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I have to come after Olivier. I hope I'll have his enthusiasm. Just to briefly also do an introduction of myself. I am not unique as to many other young people within the continent who ended up being agricultural professionals. We did not choose to do agriculture. Agriculture was chosen by our education systems. And like many other young people, you end up not liking it until you like it. I was born and raised in Nairobi, so I'm definitely not a rural youth. But then this meant for me to work in agriculture, I could not be a hypocrite. So instead of going into research immediately, I specifically went into extension, because then there's no point of me giving advice for things I could not resonate with. And that will bring my point to ICT. There's so much happening now in terms of ICT and applications, and in my experience within Kenya itself, there's a lot of innovation coming up. But then I'll start with the negative first. This is the negative part of the innovations. The innovations more often than not do not resonate, because it's easy. Developers, they get excited, they create an app, it's super exciting, they look at the details. But then does it apply to these young people in farms in different parts of rural Africa, Asia? That's one part. But on the other hand, it then contributes a lot to connectivity. If you look at Facebook, if you look at WhatsApp groups, if you look at Telegram, there are a lot of marketplaces. Thanks to these ICTs and technology, thanks to visibility. Because if I'm in the northern part of Kenya and someone else is in the coastal part of Kenya, it's easy to go on Facebook and find Marketplace Mombasa, for example. And then my product is centralized. I don't have to think about taking my product all the way to Nairobi all the time. Realize you can have your markets within these spaces thanks to small things such as technology. And the other thing that ICT has also helped to do is bridge the gap with the extension education. Like I've said, I've worked in extension education, and it's tedious work. It's going into farmers every day, and it's not the most prosperous or exciting work to do. But then you could just as well as easily collect all this information, data mine it, and provide this information to farmers, who then makes it more attractive to the younger people. It's easy for this, for your father, your uncle, your grandfather, for you to go to their farm and make them feel excited and be like, you know what, I found out about this information, let me work with you, let me help you in your farm. Yes, our parents do not trust us immediately with their farms. They do not give us their farms immediately. But then if you come in with innovation, then it piques interest. So that's one thing ICT has done in a major way.
That's perfect. And again, we'll come back to you, Emily. Paul doesn't need an introduction, so I won't give him one. He's already had one. I want to go straight to another question. And this is the big one, really, Paul. What if nothing is done? What is the scenario that would emerge?
That question I get a lot when we released it at the European Development Days. That's a lot of what the journalists were asking about what happens if we fail to act. And one of the big concerns is that the sheer number of young people. And so you have this generation that's coming up. And we already face significant problems in places like Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, other places. And if we don't try to address the issues that young people face, those problems will be the same in the future, because we haven't done as well in the past as we had hoped for, but they'll be at a bigger scale. We have the same kind of problems that'll perpetuate themselves, but we have a much larger population on which we could have these concerns, and so that is the big concern. It's impossible to know for sure what will happen, but if you end up with a lost generation going forward, then we'll likely be multiplying the problems that already exist.
Yeah. Now, I really want to bring all of you in, so I'm going to go straight now to a Q&A. So, any burning questions for our very experienced panel? Lady over here. And then the lady over there. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Cassie Hayward. I'm from Canada. I'm one of the young people who have been working towards the youth councils for the RBAs. And a question that we've all had a little bit burning is, what were the mechanisms that you used to consult between 15 and 24-year-olds in the process of making this report, and how are they actually involved in the making of this report? Because it's something that we're very interested in doing as a youth council in general.
And should we take a few, actually, so that we can move? The lady over there.
Okay. Hi. My question is targeted to Emily. That's a great... Your story is quite inspiring. And I resonate with you because with someone with an interest in agriculture, there seems to be a validation if you come from the rural areas. But if you're not from the rural areas, it seems that you can't be, in agriculture as a young person. So how did you blend the two, being an urban, so to say, urban youth with an interest with the rural people? And also, what would you say to the young person in the urban area who has an interest in agriculture but doesn't necessarily have a place to go back to in the rural areas?
It's interesting. Is there a third one before I invite the panel to respond to those questions? Let's go for those two. And if we start, that's a really interesting question. Emily, how would you respond?
How did I maneuver this space? It's respecting the space that you're working in first and foremost, realizing that, and I think this is basically also for most sciences, is you may know, but then there are people who have been practicing. So also learn. It's a co-learning process. No one knows. If you come in knowing, then you won't exchange. And in answering how, because yes, we've had a lot of, especially in Nairobi, young people, because everyone wants to make a living, and so everyone wants to invest in agriculture. They're thinking, I want to make extra money. I'm a banker, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, whatever. And they want to make more money, and so they think, yeah, let me go into farming. But as the advice I'd give is collaborate. You have people in the rural areas who have farms. In the urban area, you have money. You can't be a desktop farmer. Collaborate. Just go find, all of us, in as much as you're from the cities, our origin is the rural areas, yeah? Go to your village, find your cousins, find your uncles. Work with people, just collaborate. Provide the money, they'll provide the land, and work together.
And the first question was for you, really, Paul, wasn't it?
Yeah, thanks. It's a very good question because it was a big dilemma. A lot of what you saw is research findings. So we commissioned over 20 papers to get all the background information for this. And in our very first meeting, we looked around the room, and while we had a great deal of diversity across, academic backgrounds, all these other things, it was very hard to have young people that were there that weren't research assistants or postdocs like Eva Maria back there. And so what we decided is that we did have to make sure that everything was validated. So when we started getting results, we were having things being reviewed by young people. We have a strong youth program at IFAD, and so we used that network to make sure that we could validate everything we were doing through that network.
Oh, yes, please do.
I want to thank you for the question you raised, but I will also like to state that we should start to wrap our minds around what are the benefits for youth involved in agriculture, because many times when you speak to youth in agriculture, one may start to believe that you're actually physically involved in doing agriculture, but there's IT, where you actually provide the systems and the platform through which you can have traceabilities, for example. There are systems that are heavily driven by information technology, where programming is important. And therefore, young people who have that type of savvy can participate in agriculture by working with farmers, for example. There are opportunities for import and export, where you can provide a platform where import and export activity can take place. Blockchain technology is another one that comes to mind. So if you really look at the scope of opportunities that are available, I think the world is very well poised to create a new type of opportunity for young people to participate. And economies globally can benefit through using agricultural activity as a main economic driver. It is huge.
Any other questions?
Can I just jump in with a comment?
Yes.
which relates to the question of urban youth and rural youth. And something that hasn't been mentioned today is mentoring and the importance of having a mentoring system or a network of people, successful people, your own age, as opposed to always being taught by someone who's gray-haired. And the importance of that in giving you the confidence to do what you want to do when you're out there. So creating these networks of successful and struggling and whatever, but people your own age who are going to support you through. And that's an important part of my learning farm as well, because it's an alumni network which carries you through for the rest of your life, which is really, really important to them. It gives you the confidence.
Thank you. Any other questions? I just wanted to squeeze another one in, just briefly, any comments on this? A few of you have mentioned, and Paul did in his introduction, and Excellency, you mentioned this as well, but the triple whammy that women face in rural areas, which I found very interesting. Does anyone have any insights on how to tackle that, or just more insights on the scale of that problem? Paul?
I somewhat mentioned this in the opening, that the constraints that women face are multiplied when you're young and rural. So we have that additional problem. And it requires that you are proactive in addressing those constraints. So it's not that we just recognize them, but we actually take action to do that. And I say that because a lot of our programs, we have a tendency just to include people in our projects. So success is defined by having women in our projects or young women in our projects, when success needs to be defined by not only having them in our projects, but to address the fact that they have less access to finance, less access to education, less access to land, and to make sure we're proactively doing something about it.
Right. We need to, if it's a quick question.
Very related to your remark as well. So the woman has triple challenge, that is being a woman, being rural, and being youth. But in Yemen, there's a fourth element into it, that is living in conflict, facing war. Yeah. I think that is of highly importance, and I think it's not only in Yemen, in so many places in the world facing protracted crisis and conflict. How did you tackle that in just, few comments, if you will? Thank you.
It's a big question, isn't it? And the report does actually look into this, doesn't it? Paul, if you could be really brief, and could you use this as your concluding remark, because I'm going to go back to the panel to end with very short remarks.
It's a particular challenge dealing with conflict in general, not just the other issues, and particularly the nexus between humanitarian assistance and development is particularly challenging. And so I think here in Rome, we do need to try to address these issues, given we have WFP, FAO, and IFAD, and to think about it. But I can't give you the answer in 2 minutes, but I think that it's a very important point that we need to think about carefully.
Really pleased you raised that, actually, to cover the main points. As I said, I'd like to now go back to the panel just to ask them to give you a sentence or two, and it has to be a sentence or two, or there's going to be a penalty, just to leave a key message in your mind. So, can I start with Excellency? You go first, please.
Well, thank you. I was an opening batsman when I played cricket, so I'm accustomed to going first.
It's a compliment.
The reality of it is that you cannot see agriculture the way it was in the past, and we must now look to what technology has been able to do for us in agriculture. If you were to look at, for example, one of the cutting-edge type of hydroponic facilities where you don't actually have to go in there frequently. You just set up, use technology to turn on, turn off lights, turn on, turn off chillers, do your planting, do your sprinklers and everything. I think this is a tremendous opportunity that is available to young people in agriculture to be able to make a significant difference in terms of being entrepreneurs in a diminishing market space where job creation can no longer be led by governments.
Thank you so much. Olivier, your go.
Je pense...
Well, in my opinion,
we need to give young people an opportunity. But above all, we need to recognize their value, because it's up to young people to define their own model, irrespective of what profession you're in, whether you're a diplomat or something else. It's about choosing the model with which you wish to work. And it's also about having a participatory framework, because for me, it's a great honor to be here today, because we know what is good for us, but by being involved, by participating, we're able to define what is needed for a bigger impact. Thank you.
Emily, your turn.
For me, I'd say it shouldn't only be about youth inclusion, but about youth transformation. There should be active participation of young people, like me and Olivier at this point in time, and a few other people in the room. And also not to forget, there are those who actively chose to continue in agriculture, but then they stopped at some point. They got lost and went into finance or whatever they chose. Like, we might be looking at bringing people in, but we should also think about maintaining those who are already in the system.
Perfect, thank you. Guri, can you end us on a flourish, please? No pressure, no pressure.
Tall order. I'll end with your favorite phrase, actually, which is the Chinese saying, if you want 1 year of prosperity, you grow grain. If you want 10 years of prosperity, you grow trees. If you want 100 years of prosperity, you grow your young people.
Perfect ending. Thank you so much, your panel. Thank you.
So thank you very much to the panel and to Wendy. I think we had a very dynamic exchange. Also, thank you to the member states for all your questions. We would like to welcome Mr. Emilio Gatto, Director General, Department of Rural Development, Minister of Agriculture, Food and Forestry Policy of the Italian Republic. And you're very welcome to deliver your remarks from here or there, whatever you prefer. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, distinguished ministers and authorities, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my strong appreciation for the IFAD report and for the special attention given to young people. The IFAD Rural Development Report is an important picture of youth in rural areas and a remarkable source of information and data to which Italy is proud to have contributed. The report, Creating Opportunities for Rural Youth, not only offers an accurate analysis of rural youth population, but also offers to the policymaker and experts a sort of, a path to follow to avoid creating a lost generation, just to mention Madame Piat. At the same time, it's also an explicit call to consider young people, their energy, their dynamism, an essential part of a changing food system and an essential part of the economic and social system of the rural areas in the light of the achievement of the 2030 Agenda objectives. Young people are the link between the present and the future, between innovation, that of course strongly attracts young people, and the tradition, to which the youth have to look with interest and respect possibly, because it contains all the effort of their predecessors. So young people are also the best custodian of cultural values handed down by previous generation, including respect and care for the land in which they live. That is why it's important to give them the tools that can enable them to find employment opportunities in their land, and especially within the agricultural sector. Don't forget the women. We have just mentioned the women, but they have a special role to play as a protagonist of the cultural and social changes. And they play a fundamental role in the economy of rural society and in the development of rural communities in which they live, and we have strongly support and help them. It is crucial to give youth the opportunities to express their potential in the society, creating job opportunities, stimulating investment, sustaining family farming, and allowing young people to contribute by their own work to the sustainable growth of their territories. So, for rural areas and for the agricultural sector, it's crucial to give youth all the support they need, because they have very important tasks to perform for the vitality of rural areas, for sustainability of the agricultural activities, and for the protection of the environment. So, growing the youth, and thank you very much for this report.
Thank you very much for your important remarks. We now move to the closure of this event, and through the Rural Development Report, we have today understood how agriculture can be a driver for growth for rural people and their communities. We have also appreciated how important it is for policymakers to step up and to make the investments and policy choices that empower youth, and include young rural people as participants in the planning and decision-making processes. Thanks to our speakers, we have learned how agriculture and rural development can be a real driver for economic growth, and how important rural youth are in this regard. I would also like to thank the honorable ministers, the president of IFAD, as well as all the speakers who contributed to today's event. And thanks also to the member state representatives, representatives from the development agencies, civil society, the private sector, and the media for being with us here today. Thank you.